Good morning. As everyone's joining us today, please take a moment if you'd like to participate in this interactive session. You can join in a multitude of ways, either by going up to the top of the screen at www.menti.com and use the code, or you can also use a mobile device. If you have an iPhone or an Android, you can scan the QR code. And as I can see, we have 10 folks now, clicking the emoji buttons at the bottom, confirming that they're logging in and accessing. So thank you. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat area in our Zoom here, and we'll also be happy to facilitate any questions you may have. I apologize. I'm probably going to sound like a broken record, but we have more folks joining us. So as you're logging in, please feel free to join us today in this interactive session. We're hoping for some ways for all of us to share some ideas and solutions throughout today's presentations. You can participate anonymously, and you can also just sit back and see how others are sharing as well. But to join us today, please log in to www.menti.com if you're using a computer or using a web browser. Please enter in the code up at the top, 1183932. Or you can use a mobile device and scan in the QR code. As you can see, some folks are confirming their logins by using the emojis at the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions, please feel free to post them in the chat area, Zoom. Of course, you can still participate through chat if you're not comfortable using the Menti interactive tool. Okay, give everyone just a few more moments here to get situated. We will provide the Menti code throughout today's interactive presentation. So if you do not catch it here early on, we will have it available to you throughout today's presentation. But thank you all for all your positive thumbs up here, a few heart emojis. I see we have a question as well. But please feel free if you have any additional questions or need some technical support or troubleshooting, please feel free to use the chat area in the Zoom chat box. Thank you. Okay, let's get started here. We're going to do a quick onboarding exercise. And by using the Menti, please feel free to enter in which IU you are joining us today. We have a word cloud here, so we're going to start seeing where everyone's participating from. Take some time to fill it in. Looks like we have a lot of IU10s joining. All right, we're gonna stop it here. We're gonna move on to the presentation, but we thought this would be a nice way to see where everyone's participating from. We're really happy to have everyone today. It's quite exciting to see where everyone is joining us. It's quite a diverse group for sure.
Welcome everybody to the second webinar in our 5-part series entitled Blueprint to the Pandemic. I want to thank you for creating space for your learning. I do think it's a type of self-care, so welcome. We know that daily you're continuing to navigate the conditions brought on by COVID, and I know you've got a lot of hats, one of which is health and safety. But for the next hour, we do want to gently nudge you to have a foot in the present and one in the future as we move forward and begin to think about out of the box and ed that can support all learners. Next slide, Rebecca. Great. So just again to help you understand that this is brought to you in partnership with PDE, the Penn State College of Ed, the PA School Study Council, and the American Center for the Study of Distance Education. And now I'd like to introduce my colleagues and myself. I'm Peggy Schooling. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania School Study Council, which is located in University Park at Penn State University. I'm also a professor of practice in the Ed Leadership Department, College of Education. Right now, I'm working from home like many of you in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. I'll turn it over to my colleagues, Will and Rebecca.
Hi, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. Great to see you. I'm William Deal. You can call me Will. I'm assistant professor in the lifelong learning and adult ed program at Penn State, and I'm also the coordinator of the online graduate programs. And then I'm also the director of the American Center, excuse me, for the Study of Distance Education. And I'm affiliated, I'm an associate editor for the American Journal of Distance Education as well. So it's a pleasure to be here.
Good morning, everyone. I am Rebecca Heiser. I'm joining you from sunny San Diego, though our sun is still on its way up this morning. But I am the lead instructional designer for the Lifelong Learning and Adult Education Graduate Program hosted through Penn State's World Campus. I'm also the Applied Research Coordinator for the World Campus Learning Design Unit and spend a lot of my time researching open educational resources and practices. I also spend quite a bit of time looking at equity, inclusion, and bias, specifically within learning analytics. And I am very happy to be joining you this morning. Thank you.
Great. So what I want to do next is to give an overview again of where we're headed, because some people may be joining us for the first time. So really our focus is to help school and system leaders, and that includes teacher leaders, to develop a systems approach to distance education. And by the end of the series, we hope that teams of educators will continue to review and refine and reflect upon the plans that you've already developed, and maybe identify system component strengths and weaknesses, and then to consider some specific action steps that will improve your system moving forward. So to do this, we're going to take you through a series of steps to examine what we believe are major the distance ed system. And for each of these 5 steps, we want to provide you with a tool really to help you think through each system. All of these tools are interrelated, but do provide you with an opportunity to take a laser-like focus on components of the system. So last time we were together for the first webinar, we provided an overview of the system with a focus on leadership using the common language tool. Rebecca, can you go back to the last slide? Thanks. And then today we're going to engage you in an interactive webinar to begin prioritizing your needs. And then in step 3, which is webinar 3, we're going to focus on facilitation and modalities to consider how each of the models, asynchronous and synchronous, face-to-face, align with your curriculum. And we'll also examine different types of media that support learning and consider the role of technology. And then in step 4, which is webinar 4, we're going to address how to develop the learning environment to scale with a focus on course and curriculum design and technology integration and so forth. And then in step 5, we're going to focus on the optimal learner-centered instructional strategies. Okay, so our goals today. So we're going to quickly engage you in a review process to revisit your planning process through the lens of the DE system components. So if you missed last week, we'll do that quick overview for you. We're going to identify some strengths and opportunities using what we've developed called a prioritization scorecard, which should help you kind of frame the way your direction, and then to help you with your that meets your needs in your local context. So from your feedback from the last webinar, we understand there are a range of needs, across the Commonwealth, some of which there are really clear answers to that we can help you with, and others which we think will require some problem solving, not only within your organization, but across the Commonwealth. So therefore, we really invite you to participate today in this very interactive session. Also to use our Twitter handle, which is #5past. And also to join our discussion forums. And you'll see the link for those things in the chat. Okay, so next slide, Rebecca, thanks. So just a quick review here, and then we will have you interact with us on what resonated for you with this model from last week. So for those people who aren't here, I'm gonna kind of give you a quick review. So with this model, again, our goal is to help you to think strategically, and with the goal of to create scalable systems that work in your organization. So when we think about scalability, it really depends on acting on a set of guiding principles that enable you to ask better questions and to solve the problems of practice that you encounter in your system. So it's not really about taking one set of actions nor replicating necessarily the work of others, although certainly we can borrow great ideas from each other. And because we know there aren't any silver bullets, so we really hope that you will use the common language and guiding questions tool that was introduced last week to serve as the guiding principles in developing your system. And we really want to encourage district teams and IUs to join together to work through each of the major systems questions, because as we discussed in the last webinar, we put a learner-centered approach at the forefront of our model. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that model. So the model consists of a number of systems. So we know in a systems model, each component has a relationship to each other and they're interdependent. So actions or changes that you initiate in one component do impact other components. So for example, last week we talked about the importance of leadership, and we know all of those components of strategic planning and administration and quality assessment, evaluating the impact of your decisions, professional development, policy, and so forth. They all interact. And we know that one change that you make in one area does affect another. The second system that we introduced last week was the facilitation and modality system. And that's really addresses the synchronous, asynchronous, and blended approaches and examines the types of media and mediums, technology as a support, and use of social media. The third system we talked about last week was development and design. And when we think about that, we think of a system that examines course and curriculum design, the content, how teams organize around design work, and how students interact with the content, with each other, and their teachers. And then finally, the teaching component really addresses curriculum instruction, assessment, teachers present, classroom management, subject matter expertise, supporting 21st century skills. And many of you will recognize that some of these components and many of these components actually align to the Danielson framework. So the last part of the system, which is really the foundational piece, and it's something that I think we will continue to have conversations about, is how to examine these components through an equity and inclusion lens, where we start to design a system that meets the most vulnerable students first, which will then provide opportunities for everybody. and that we also consider, as Rebecca will help us think about, is like global content and resources, and where we utilize the strengths and supports of our stakeholders and communities. Now that's a lot, that's a quick review. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca, and she's going to engage you in an exercise here using Mentimeter. So I'll turn it over to Rebecca.
Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, so let's take a moment here to see which of the components resonated with you with Peggy's overview. I'm going to go ahead and hide the image here, but please feel free to type in some of the ideas that came from that as you were hearing the overview. And maybe if you had some time between our last webinar, please feel free to share. You have about 250 characters and you can submit as many times as you'd like. We're going to pause here to see some of the high level overviews, some of the ideas that you all are sharing. We'll take some time here as folks can get situated and share some of their ideas. I see that learning is really focused on your minds. Facilitation modality. Seeing a few of those. Access is a big one. And that's one of the goals of distance learning and distance education. Foundationally, that has always been the way and one of the goals for distance education as a system to provide more access to learners. A lot of those learners may not be considered what some folks would say traditional. So this makes a lot of sense to see access coming up. And obviously closely aligned with access is also equity. So it's nice to see this one comment here, the equity lens for the most vulnerable students, really focusing on learning. We're just going to pause here so we can see more of these scroll through. An interesting comment here, the number of things that have to go right in order for learning to occur. A systems approach to reimagine distance learning. It begins with leadership and an articulated plan. All right, well, I am going to move on to the next slide because we have quite a bit to cover here. This is really wonderful to see all of your comments. And so we're going to turn this over to Will.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. And thanks everyone for participating. We really appreciate it. So now we're going to cover our suggestions for your planning process and moving forward. We'd like you to take a holistic community approach, and I noticed in your submissions just recently, a lot of people mentioned that. We know that you've been driven by health and safety guidelines, and now we want you to continue to think about moving forward, thinking about your full system and about learning. And again, we saw learning as one of the components that you're really focused on as well in your comments. And we want you to start thinking about the future. We can't do everything at once in a system, but we can hope that we will, what we present here will help you think about how you can make a plan to serve everyone in your districts and schools and communities. Step one is to assemble your teams. And your teams can include parents, community, staff, administrators, and teachers, and in some cases, even the students. You can use the systems illustrations in our first toolkit to think about this plan and to then act upon it. And then your stakeholders are the people that represent an interest and can affect or be affected by decision makers. You want to think about identifying all of the groups of individuals that comprise your stakeholder support for distance ed, and also for considering your entire system. And as you think about these groups, we want to urge you to be creative and to imagine ways that you can perhaps even form groups across grade levels, across roles. Think about how these groups intersect, how they affect one another, and think multidisciplinary. And then you want to think about how you will include all of these stakeholders in the planning, the implementation, the monitoring, and evaluation of your plans. And you want to look at everyone's perspectives and see how everyone fits into that system. So on the next slide here, we've been really focused on safety and health, and rightly so. You've had to really think first about who can be in the physical classrooms, what modes you operated in, and these have really been prioritized by health and safety. So we've really been in a type of survival mode, but I know that a lot of you are focusing on other hierarchical needs that are illustrated in this slide. As you move forward with your work. So we're hoping that the pathway we're covering in this webinar series will allow you to spend more time focusing on the love and belonging, esteem, self-actualization, and on learning especially. We really believe that considering a systems approach will provide opportunities to reflect and to make changes that make sense to you in your context, so that your system is even of higher quality as we all move into the months ahead and even the years ahead after, as this pandemic is hopefully brought under control. And we really do see this as a time of opportunity for everyone. It's definitely a challenge. I don't have to tell you that, but it's also an opportunity. I just, want to say it's exciting that so many people are available here and are collaborating and pulling together. Before I move on to the next slide, take a few seconds to congratulate yourself on the work you're already doing and for taking the time to dive into this initiative that we have here.
So let's move on to step 2, where once you've defined your team, we recommend that you use the comprehensive tool that provides definitions to all the system components. And it also helps prompt dialogue among your team members to contextualize your current efforts and future goals. The intention here is to use the common language and guiding question as a needs assessment to help shape your distance learning plan. And of course, we're going to be heading back to Menti, as you can imagine. So we thought it would be a really rich exercise to practice and demonstrate how this tool can be, the guiding questions tool can be utilized. We also felt it would be informative to share and learn with others, to see not only what they are doing, but also to help create a sense of community, crowdsource some solutions to these really complex and unique challenges. So in the next few slides, we're going to share some guiding questions from the tool that addresses some of the subsystems in the distance learning model. These questions are not arbitrary. They are reflective of the conversations that we've been having with some of you, and they also represent questions or concerns that you have shared in the follow-up surveys. So this is going to be a practice round. One of the emerging themes that we've been hearing from you is the need to address professional development plans to support blended and distance learning models. So as you think about your current plan, how are you evaluating the existing gaps in skills and expertise, and how are you supporting and addressing those gaps? As you reflect on this question, we're going to return back to the Mentimeter on the next slide to share your approaches and to learn from one another. So again, we're going to take a moment here to share some short answers. You can submit multiple answers. You can submit up to 250 characters. But as you think about your current plans, how are you evaluating your existing gaps in skills and expertise? And how are you supporting and addressing those gaps? Okay, so we have lots of surveys coming through. Frequent virtual walkthroughs. Now, that's an interesting one. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like. There's a couple more. Evaluating by frequent virtual classroom visits. Online trainings. Are those trainings incorporating both pedagogy and technical support and expertise? Holding training sessions for teachers, formative assessments. I'm wondering, do we have any professional learning communities or small mentor to mentee partner pairs? Currently reactive to needs as they arise and then formulating a plan. We have lots of surveys. Here's one, teacher-driven PLCs. Needs based from individuals, grade levels, department areas. More virtual walkthroughs, peer collaboration. Frequent communication and collaboration with parents. It's wonderful to see the parent involvement there. Surveys, real-time monitoring of systems, adapt policy, staffing, hardware to correct deficits. See a lot more virtual walkthrough observations. I'm gonna hand the mic over to Peggy and Will if any of these jump out to you as we scroll through some of them.
I think one that jumps out to me is the surveys, and wondering about how frequently the surveys are being done. Like, are they being done on a regular basis? Because as we move through this pandemic, particularly with training, I think it'd be really interesting to understand how the attitudes and the perceptions and changes of practice are occurring from the beginning through a period of time. So that's really interesting to me.
Big question. We are relying on our instructional coaches and teachers to provide feedback regarding needs of students and teachers. Tiered professional development. So this has just been a practice round. We're going to move forward with our next question. So let's focus on quality assessment. This is another area that you all shared with us as an area for continued exploration. So as we think about this question, how are you evaluating your distance learning system? We're going to return back to Menti to share some of our ideas with one another. But there are multiple ways that we can be evaluating our distance learning system. So we'd love to hear from you what you've been providing or what you consider and hope to be providing in the future. I'll give you all some time to think that through here. So you're evaluating your distance learning system through focus groups. It's wonderful. Those take a lot of time, but hopefully they're very inclusive to all of your stakeholders. Parent feedback, teacher feedback, student data. Informal discussions. Ad hoc stakeholder committee focus groups. We have lots of feedback from stakeholders, feedback from surveys, student surveys. It's good to see. Going to look at the toolkit number 1. There we go. All right. Student data. We have observations from synchronous instruction. Student attendance as a function of engagement and lots of anecdotal data. What about if some of your courses or classes had mid-course surveys? Those are also useful tools to help personalize instruction for the remainder of the semester. Student data, both grades and attendance. Shadowing students. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what that looks like.
I like that we're seeing a lot of parent feedback here. The parents are in an entirely new role these days within this system. And so that's great. I think that I imagine you're getting some good insights from the parents to look at some of the gaps in the system.
So we're going to move on to the next question here, because we want to take a moment here to work through all of the components of the system. So obviously we began with leadership. We're now going to move over to facilitation and modality. And I think we're really getting the hang of it here. These components with facilitation modality focus not only on the tools to deliver content and instruction, but the approaches on how to facilitate learning. So let's share some ideas on how the facilitation model or the models meet the needs of all of our learners. And we have to think about, what are we currently providing? What would you like to be providing? And as Peggy mentioned, in our next webinar, we will explore facilitation and modality in much greater detail. In particular, we will share an inclusive design framework that focuses on the 3 interactions in distance education, which are student to content, student to teacher, and student to student. And so we're going to discuss how to leverage these interactions across the curriculum. So how does the facilitation model or models meet the needs of all of our learners? In all of these models, we also think about the asynchronous components and the synchronous components. But we've been hearing a lot recently that some students are really succeeding in distance learning environments or blended learning environments. So there's obviously some benefit to this modality. We'll take a moment here for everyone to share some ideas or some things that they're experiencing. Again, short answers are recommended. You have up to 250 characters, so please feel free to participate. We have a comment here that I don't think that the facilitation model or models do meet the needs of all learners. I think we can dive into that a little bit more deeply, thinking a lot about multimodal learning and content and instruction. This is a huge struggle for teachers, and we really understand that, because designing and developing courses online take a lot of time and planning. So absolutely, we need to address how to facilitate that, how to provide more support. A lot of times teachers take on a role more of that of a project manager. So it takes on new skill sets, and we have to address how those can be supported and enhanced. Every model needs accommodations in order to meet their needs. Absolutely. Provides for differentiated ways for students to respond and varied ways for instructors to adapt and modify content efficiently. It's very difficult for teachers who have students face-to-face and virtual simultaneously. Absolutely. That is a difficult model to sustain. And yes, shifting the mindsets for all stakeholders. There's definitely a very negative narrative out there. And I think we can work together to improve awareness and share some best practices. And we do know that there's a lot of good work that's happening. So we need to really focus on that and learn from one another. All right, I'm just going to scroll through some
I
more.
see the building a plane while flying it. Yes. And also there's, this sense of urgency to make everything work right away. I would just encourage everyone to start thinking, try to not think about this as a sprint, but, think what kind of incremental steps can I take to just continuously make improvements, because it's not like Rebecca was saying, it does take time. So, give yourself a break, and, everyone's working really hard, and, take a deep breath and work through this incrementally, and, think longer term, if you're able to. I know there's a lot of pressure to make things happen quickly, but.
We're going to move on to the next question here. And I'm sure you're starting to see how this is all working. And also how you can use the guiding questions tool to hopefully employ it within your own teams. So we only have 2 more of these exercises left to brainstorm some ideas for our distance education plans. But as we reflect on this current question, how does the learning environment support a human-centered design to provide a positive experience for all of our stakeholders? And as you have considered, we saw that there's lots of surveys and virtual walkthroughs, but have you considered what a day in the life of a student looks like, and what it looks like for their families and caregivers? And what does it look like for their teachers and support staff? So how do our decisions affect all of our stakeholders, and how can we be more empathetic to their experience? We're going to unpack many of these questions in our January webinar. But for now, as you can see, we're gonna go back to what you're already providing, some of your thoughts and ideas about how the learning environment can support a human-centered design. I'll give you all a moment here to share some of your thoughts. We've asked teachers to go beyond their human capacity. We're not making widgets. I agree, we are not making widgets. That is not the goal of learning. Opportunity to personalize learning, student engagement, creating a community of learners is foundational to success. It's people, not programs, that make the experience change and work. All stakeholders must feel empowered in order to have a sense of ownership in this process. Teachers working closely with students and teachers to help. Consistent, yes, consistency, that is absolutely correct. Centralizing your tools is a really wonderful way. Thinking about how your courses are set up, making sure that there's consistency for students as to where they find their assessments, where they find their syllabi, all of those things, making sure that you have a uniform course navigation, uniform ways to communicate, how to log in through synchronous opportunities. These are all wonderful ways. The possibilities for personalization, customization is powerful, absolutely. And in some ways, technology can help support that. Uniform learning platforms, absolutely. Again, getting back to that consistency. Focus on authentic engagement, yes. Opposed to arbitrary completion of outdated assignments just to check the box, yes. Think about ways that you can incorporate e-portfolios and learning journals. Learning can take place outside of the online learning environment. This is wonderful. So I'm going to just move on here. We're going to jump into our last question. I'm sure we have some more ideas here, because I think we were starting to see some questions about instructional strategies. So how are the instructional strategies designed to meet the individual needs of our students? So many of you have shared in the past that you've already been employing learner-centered strategies in your classrooms and your professional development plans. And we saw that in one of our earlier questions, that A lot of you were already supporting learner-centered approaches. And this is all really great, but how are the technologies, the tools, resources, content, learning design, assessment strategies helping to support student achievement? And so this is our last question here. And we're going to take a moment to pause. Again, short answers. You can submit multiple times. You have 250 characters. Please feel free to share some of your ideas. Multimodal, there we go. and thinking about ways of open pedagogy and letting students have choice, giving them multiple ways for them to submit an assignment. Here we go, multiple ways to respond to an assignment: video, audio, text, choice. They need to establish student-centered instruction rather than teacher-directed. Absolutely. We have to think about technology not as a delivery tool, but as a facilitation tool. Think about how learning is facilitated. It's not delivered. We don't deliver content and instruction, we facilitate it. Voice and choice. Universal design for learning. Here we go, UDL. And another universally designed, absolutely. Open office hours. It's great. So what we're going to do now is I'd like to introduce you all to our third step here. And this is really one of the goals that we've set out for today. And now that we've reviewed the Common Language and Guiding Questions tool, we'd like to introduce you to our next tool, which is the prioritization scorecard. And this scorecard builds from the Common Language and Guiding Questions tool to quantify and benchmark where you are and how to prioritize your future trajectory. This is a highly contextualized process, so we hope that this tool helps break it down and focus on critical areas for exploration. Luckily, this is only a 2-page scorecard. It asks you to work with your team to focus on the definitions of the Common Language tool and to evaluate your strengths and weaknesses. So as you think of quality assurance, which is one of our definitions in the Guiding Questions tool, quality assurance is the arrangement by which an LEA monitors its teaching and support for course design to promote improvement. Now, how would you go ahead and rate your current situation of quality assurance for in-person learning? And so we're operating on a scale of 0, which is not developed or critical, to 3, which is highly effective and agile, which also provides you the ability to assess for continuous improvement. So now, how would you rate your current system for blended learning? And then what about distance learning? Each one of these gets another point value. And then as you total this up and quantify for each of those modalities, do you consider yourself to get a 9, that you got a 3, a perfect in all areas and all modalities, or maybe a 4, a combination between low and neutral? So as you think of the definitions for each modality, in-person, blended, and distance, and you rate your current systems, this scorecard intends to identify areas in which you can focus on your continuity plan and develop your future trajectory. But of course, if you haven't expected this yet, we're going to go ahead and practice first. So up at the top of your screen, you can see the definition that we have provided in the Guiding Questions tool for quality assurance. And these are the arrangements by which an LEA monitors its teaching and support for course design to promote improvement. I'm going to give you all a moment to think about that. And if you're following along on Menti, you'll see that we have provided the point value system on the tool to see where you currently are with your quality assurance plan. So I'm going to go ahead and share where you are at this point. So we have a lot working at operational. We have one person who's identified that they're very effective and agile. Ooh, lots of ones. All those points keep going over there. We have quite a few coming in at number 2, that you're sufficiently operational and you're fine tuning, but you're not in a critical stage. All right, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Well, it looks like we have a few more coming in, but it looks like overall the majority were operating at 1 and 2. And we would love to hear from these groups operating at 3 on ways that you can share some of your effective practices with the rest of us. So let's move on to the next one. So we're taking the same definition of quality assurance, but now we're thinking about it in a blended or hybrid modality. And let's take a moment to see what are our current, how are we currently providing quality assurance in blended learning environments. So I see we have 7 folks who've responded so far. We're going to go ahead and see where people are operating. All right, so we have more coming in at both 0 and 2 this time. We have another outlier who's very effective and agile and has the ability to evaluate and assess for continuous improvement. But it looks like, again, we're still mostly working at 1. We obviously have an increase in a critical situation where it's just not developed, underdeveloped, and available. All right, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move on to the next one, because I'm sure you see where we're headed here. Here's our third modality, distance learning. What and how are you currently providing quality assurance for your distance learning? And this one, it seems like a quick uptick on people's thoughts. Let's see where we are. We're kind of going neck and neck here with 0 and 1. Again, we have someone operating at a 3, so it'd be great to hear some of their effective practices. We'll take some more time. All right, so has everyone thought about where and how you've rated yourselves? Because we're going to go on to this next slide and ask ourselves, what was your total score? Are we operating at 9? Looks like a lot of us are working at maybe 3. There are a lot of 1s there. I'm seeing some thumbs down. So as you all think about this and go back to the guiding questions tool, working through each of those definitions and working through the prioritization scorecard will be really helpful to help define where you are, where you need to focus, what your goals are. It's not necessarily thinking about where the gaps are, but also thinking about where do you wish and hope to be in the next 3 to 5 years, and how can you develop a plan to help you get there. We're going to move on to the next slide. I'm going to hand the mic off to Will.
All right, thanks. So we've had a chance now to think about what your results are. And of course, later you can take more time to have an in-depth reflection on this with your groups, and you'll have a better idea of those areas that you may want to focus. So we'd also welcome any further reactions in the chat on this or in the app. And on this slide, yep, there we go. We'd like to ask you which one of the systems components is your greatest strength. And it looks like facilitation and modality is an area that people are identifying as a strength, but a lot of others, majority are in leadership area. Teaching is strong. A lot of some are saying design and development as a strength. It's interesting. And you know, we really want to thank you for participating in this today. It's really helpful. We're taking a look at each webinar and the feedback that we get so that we can design the upcoming webinars so that they're especially valuable to you. So this is really great to get this feedback. Okay, so on this slide, we have some action items here that we want to share with you. The information is also in the chat area. Judd has put this in the chat area. It's up a little bit higher. We can put that in again for you. But we've got the instructional toolkit that you can take a look at, and just systematically, you know, we encourage you to systematically get together and go down through the questions in toolkit 1, and then we just showed you some examples of the scorecard, so you can go through those, and those are available via the URL that we'll put in here for you and on the website. We've got an Act 45 course that is happening in the spring, starts February 16th. And then again in the summer, June 22nd, and those registrations are open. This is a course that will allow you to systematically go through and create a project plan. And it's really flexible, so you can focus in whatever areas of the system that you're interested in, or if you're a superintendent, for example, you can focus on the entire system and put together a plan. We bring in some guest speakers who are experts in the field, and I think you know, you might consider that. I think that it would be valuable for you. We have discussion forums set up at the distancelearningforum.com site that you see here. The URL is there for you. Please feel free to join conversations there. And then we also have the Twitter feed, and the hashtag 5PAST is there. And we encourage you to develop community there. And we will also, Rebecca, Peggy, and myself will be participating in those discussions as well. So the bottom line is we're here to support you. And we would like to encourage you to participate in between the webinars. Your feedback is really valuable. You can feel free to reach out to us individually. We have on this site, we've got the URLs, or sorry, on this slide, we have the URLs for our websites, the Pennsylvania School Study Council, and then the American Center for Distance Education.com. I have a mailing list at the American Center, and 2021 is going to be packed full of expert presentations that you can attend. And I would even welcome you to do presentations at the center if you would like to do that. So we want to invite you to continue to collaborate and participate. And I will hand this over to Peggy at this point.
Okay, hold on. There we go. All righty. So we want to thank you and really make sure that if you're interested in Act 48, there is a URL that will be put into the chat that you ought to use. And then I want to move on to the very last slide. So we're hoping, as far as next steps and next webinars, we hope that you appreciated the modeling that we did for the guiding questions and also the prioritization, and hope that you might try that on in your own setting, whether you do it without technology or that you do it in a face-to-face setting. So we think take that prioritization card and work with your district or IU team to identify your strengths and generate ideas for your next step. Because in our next webinar, we're going to really take a deeper dive into facilitation and modalities with a focus on 3 types of interaction. And we will address some of the things that are concerns that were brought up today through the questions. So we want to thank you for your time, and we don't want to keep you any longer than an hour. And it looks like we're staying right where we need to be. So if there's, Judd, if there's nothing else, we want to say thank you, and we look forward to hearing from you in the future.
No, everything looks good in the chat, Peggy, and thanks to everybody that hopped on. And one of the things that did flow out of the chat, Peggy, was just making sure each of the teams knows who the continuity of education point of contact is in their region so that they can reach out for additional supports. And we'll make sure to follow up with those resources. And all of the links that we dropped in the chat, we'll drive back out in a follow-up email so everyone has those links at their fingertips. And if they were unable to grab it out of the chat window, and we just really appreciate all of your supports and continue to give us the iterative feedback so we can make these experiences valuable as possible. I want to thank Will and Peggy and Rebecca for the session today, and everybody taking an hour to hop on and reimagine their distance learning systems. So thank you.